audio by Raising Free People Network.
I'm Akila S. Richards, grief literacy educator, longtime podcaster, here to explore what we lose individually and collectively when we fail to name grief as part of our everyday life. Grief isn't just about death, it's about endings, expired relationships, outgrown roles, identities and dreams we released. If we tend to grief in its diversity, we can expand our capacity to navigate change, to hold space for each other, and to move with more presence in a rapidly shifting world. This is What I Let Die podcast, where we move from grief struck to grief tending. What happens when we stop avoiding grief? Let's find out together. Hey, you. Welcome to episode 7 of What I Let Die podcast, a grief literacy public service project, situation, ritual. I'm your host, Akila S. Richards, and this one is about friendings, friendships, and endings. This one is for the friendships that ended without a big fight, but still hurt. For the calls that stopped, the text threads that dried up. For the soft estrangements, and for the hard ones too. For the way it all hurts when us turns into was. And the grief that lives in those moments, even when we chose the endings ourselves. I'm calling this one friendings, the moment a friendship ends or shifts in a way that feels like loss. And just like other types of loss, it deserves space. It needs room to notice, room to name, room to witness, room to nurture. And so in this episode, I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm sharing a clip from inside the I course, the I Let It Die grief course, where we talked about the grief of friendship loss. And I'm going to walk you through, in addition to playing that clip, just some of the witnessing and noticings of that messy middle of friendings and of family estrangement too, because sometimes the end of a friendship is within your own family. And that's all mixed in, but it's all relevant. And even though I have an episode that's focused on family and grief, I feel like it's important to name it here too, because we got cousins, we got siblings, we got people in our family that we also have or had real friendships with, and those too can end. So I first want to talk about why we tend to underestimate this grief. Friendings don't usually come with, potato salad and sympathy cards. They're often not seen as real losses. In my experience, in a lot of the people that I am with, like I remember when I went through seminary and we talked a lot about the endings of friendships and how there wasn't room to grieve that. So they're often not seen as real losses. But if you've ever had a friend that you considered your person, your anchor, your fam, then you know the way that loss can tear you up, not just as like part of your social life changing, but a part of your sense of self, a part of your identity even. And because in society, we tend to elevate romantic partnerships and downplay friendships, especially in the Western context, Westernized culture, then it's even harder. Because the reality is that friendships shape us. They witness our growth. They hold our stories. So when they shift, whether it's by choice or by circumstance, there is usually grief that we don't quite know how to name and often don't have a place to tend to. Friendings can be full of both longing and relief. Maybe we needed that distance. Maybe we even wanted it, but it doesn't cancel out the grief. That's how grief is so interesting. You can choose to let something die and still grieve the absence of that thing. There's grief in what was. There's grief in what never quite was. And then there's grief in what you hoped would still be. Because oftentimes with a friendship, we've tried a few times. We try to make it what it wasn't. And then maybe we realize it was never going to be that, or we didn't have the time or space to try to keep making it that. So there's grief in what was, all the time and energy you spent, and all the beautiful aspects of it that are no longer going to continue to happen. No new memories. There's grief in what never quite was, all the efforting. And maybe even again in the parts of the friendship that were beautiful. This is the one friend that I could such and such with. And then there's grief in what you hoped would still be. Damn, I wish that when I said this in this way, they would have been able to receive it, or I would have been able to receive it differently. But it got me messed up. I can't move past it. I cannot believe XYZ. Grief in all of that. So here's where I want to share with you this clip from the live session of I Let It Die, the grief literacy course that I teach a few times a year. And I will be sure to put the link to the wait list so that if you are interested in the 2025 round of the eyelid course, the second 2025 round, because I did one earlier this year, I'll make sure you have the link to that. But this is a 6-ish minute reflection about the role of friendship in our lives and the quiet, complex grief that arises, the various types of griefs that arise, really, when those friendships change. Friendships are often seen as less valuable than romantic partnerships, certainly in Western or Westernized society. We put a lot of energy and effort into the romantics, but the other friendships, the other relationships, the other points of connection often don't get the same kind of hype, the same kind of focus. And that's one of the reasons why changes or loss or gains, just changes in friendships, can often really affect us in ways that we do not get the opportunity to name, notice, nurture. So for you, offer some attention to your history with even the word friendship and what you might not be getting or have gotten that you needed or need from this notion of friend. Are you often the type of friend that you need, but don't often get that back? If you imagined your patterns with friends or friendships, like a pattern that you could feel with your fingers or with your feet, if it's on the ground, feel through the pattern of friendship in your history. Is it bumpy? Is it smooth? Do you have to stretch your fingers wide to get to different parts of it, or put your fingers close? Or maybe the pattern isn't something you can touch. Maybe it's something you can look at. What is the pattern? Where is longing? What is the role of longing in friendship? Loss, boundary. What have you been taught or told about a friend that don't go with what you need? Have you had to be? How have you had to perform or show up in order to hold this notion of friend. There is so much opportunity in this moment, in this space, for you to give yourself permission to really feel into this notion of friendship. Are you your friend? The unknown is, of course, present and significant here. Let that be okay as much as you can. Like, who's your friend right now? And is that still consensual? Are they also a friend of yours as you need them to be now? And if they're not, is there grief around that? That's it. Not what do you do, just is there grief around that? The types of grief that we experience that often need tending isn't always native to us. We can experience external grief and it bring in things for us. Real, legit, valid ass experiences that are rooted in something we witnessed. In this moment, I'm thinking about my mother's mother, the same one where Kananapo came from, Etel, and how I never saw her, nor did her children, with any friends. She didn't have that we were aware of, both generations. She was friends with her sisters, and she had a friend in Jesus. But we didn't see her with friends. And I use the word but real soft, but we didn't see her with friends because I don't know if it's a but I wonder about that. And I have grief around that experience, that woman that raised so many children across so many generations. Did she feel like she had the space to kiki and to do the different things that we do with our friends? In my mind, things that you might long for a friend, like you want that for them. You want that thing to stop for them or start for them. That is a type of grief. For those of us who are parents, watching our children in relationships with friends, how they view friendship can absolutely invite and include grieving. Again, I'm appreciating the communication and presence here, and I hope we're all tapping into it. So I mentioned the grief of seeing my grandmother's friendlessness. And when I think about it even more and reflecting on it now, both of my grandmothers, the one that I mentioned, Etel, who I spent a lot of time with in my first 4 years of life and almost every weekend and almost every summer and Christmas and all the holidays, and as well as my paternal grandmother, who I spent most of the time with. I lived with her for years. In both of them, when I think about them, so the one whose story we told, who gave us Kananapo, and the one who gave us this version of me in many ways. She was such an influencer in my life. They raised generations, both of them. They carried lifetimes. But especially with Etel, I never saw her with a friend. Not a neighbor dropping by, not a sister circle, not a homegirl to laugh with or cry with. She had her sisters. She had her Jesus. But did she have a friend? I grieve that. not just for her, but because of what that absence said to me about womanhood, about duty, about friendship. Really, I didn't see it modeled. And so I wonder how come I felt entitled to it. Or did I? I don't know. But I do know that there is grief in what I witnessed with Mama. And so I also want to talk about and presence in this episode when bloodlines don't mean bond. Sometimes the hardest friendship loss is the one we never even had. The sibling who never saw you, the cousin who always took but never gave, the parent you tried to befriend maybe as an adult, but who never let you be your full-size self around them. That's family grief. That's friendship grief. That's estrangement. And sometimes some of us choose distance between family to survive, to stay soft, to stay sane. Shit. And in that choosing, we often lose the chance to grieve out loud because people around us don't always see that as valid. But it is valid. And you are not alone in that choice or in that grief. So here's what I'm leaving you to sit with around this particular aspect of your grief tending. Some questions. I got 5 of them written down here. Who were you to your friends, and who were they to you? Are there patterns in your friendships that are asking to be felt? Are there friendships you're still grieving, even quietly? Are there friendships you initiated and still wonder about? Are they still in that grayish area? Do I need to be here? And the last question, are you the friend you need? Are you the friend you need? So again, grief doesn't only come when someone dies. It comes when the shape of a bond changes. It comes when us stops being mutual. And the more we let ourselves name these types of grief, the more space we make for healing that doesn't rush, for endings that still honor what was true, and for beginnings that don't have to pretend nothing was lost. That's the type of healing that I'm talking about. Because I don't know that we can heal grief. I don't see grief as a thing to heal. But I do know that suffering, that aspect often comes from untended grief. Grief is what it is. It remains. It is consistent. It is regenerative. But all the things that dance around it when we don't tend to it, that's what we're feeling into here. And that's where healing is possible. So I thank you for being here with me in this space for the grief and for the expansion of how we move with and understand grief. And if this episode spoke to you, please share it with someone you've loved and lost, whether that loss was through distance or decision or a type of death. And if you're ready to go deeper into these conversations, you are always invited to join me over at radicalselfie.org/wild, where I share a postmortem, just a short summary, and maybe a few more insights about each episode. And each of those postmortems for each episode also has the link to the Wild Podcast chat room, where we are already in conversation about how these things are moving through us, our wisdom, our longings, what we have to say, what we have to ask. So I invite you to come on over to that space for more. Until next time, may we grieve well and live even better. Peace.
This episode is part of a multi-episode series that serves as a public, free, grief literacy project called What I Let Die Podcast. The show is co-produced by Akila S. Richards and Kate Umstatter-Thompson. Show art by Chris Richards. Much of the content comes from or is inspired by Akila's Grief Tenders course called the Eyelid Course, an acronym for I Let It Die. Show notes and resources are available at radicalselfie.org/wild. Share the show with friends and be sure to rate the show wherever you listen to it.